recording it? Like, why would you record this for any reason? Why would you record this in the hospital? And in case you think that I'm being unfair, she suffers from such a rare disorder of being unable to just be a human. I can't stand the inauthenticity. It has to stop. I tried with you, Meghan, really. You gotta pick a lane, you gotta stay in it, okay? That's all I'm saying.
I know.
Yeah. Meghan Markle has always insisted her story is one of truth, resilience, and authenticity. But now, even her most personal chapter, her pregnancy, is under fire. And the loudest voice calling it out is none other than Candace Owens. The conservative commentator has zero hesitation in tearing into contradictions others have tiptoed around, and her sharp words have reignited whispers about Meghan's account of Archie's birth, whispers that refuse to go away. And there's so much to unpack here, from Harry's questionable claims in Spare about epidurals and a lightning-fast recovery, to Portland hospital staff whose quiet recollections don't match the royal narrative, to the way Meghan's own advocacy for maternal health is clashing with her private story. The cracks are impossible to ignore. This isn't just about one pregnancy, it's about credibility. If Meghan and Harry can't keep the details of such a monumental moment straight, what else in their carefully crafted image starts to unravel? Candace Owens has never been one to mince words. Known for her unapologetic commentary, she thrives on pointing out inconsistencies others avoid. And when she turned her attention to Meghan Markle's pregnancy story, the effect was immediate. Headlines flared and old questions resurfaced. In a viral segment, Owens zeroed in on details from Harry's memoir, Spare. She highlighted how his description of Meghan's labor read more like a glossy fairy tale than a realistic medical account. Owens didn't need to invent anything. She simply lined up the facts as Harry presented them and asked the question out loud, does this even add up? Her critique landed because it echoed what skeptics had whispered for years, that Meghan's pregnancy narrative was riddled with contradictions. By shining a spotlight on those cracks, Owens dragged the discussion from fringe gossip into mainstream debate. For Meghan, who carefully positions herself as a symbol of honesty and empowerment, this was devastating. Because when someone like Owens brings receipts, even just inconsistencies already in print, it sticks, and the public starts wondering what else isn't quite as it seems. When Spare hit the shelves, it promised an unfiltered look into Harry's life, raw, vulnerable, and honest. But for medical professionals and eagle-eyed readers, his description of Archie's birth raised more questions than it answered. Harry wrote about Meghan being admitted to Portland Hospital in London, receiving not one but 2 epidurals, and then recovering so quickly that she was discharged within hours. On paper, it sounds like a storybook birth, intense, dramatic, and perfectly wrapped up with mother and child whisked off to Frogmore Cottage by the end of the day. But here's where the contradictions start. Medical experts flagged the claim of 2 epidurals as unusual, even implausible. Standard practice is a single dose carefully monitored, since doubling up can cause complications. And yet Harry described it almost casually, as if it were routine. Then there's the timeline. Most mothers who undergo epidurals remain in hospital for at least 24 hours of observation, sometimes longer. But Harry insisted Meghan was home within hours, driving a distance that itself raised eyebrows. It's the kind of detail that doesn't align with typical medical advice, and that's exactly why it's now being dissected. For Meghan and Harry, this might have seemed like harmless storytelling, but for critics like Candace Owens, it was evidence of a narrative too polished to be real and too careless to go unchallenged. Harry's memoir painted a serene picture. Meghan, radiant after giving birth, leaving Portland Hospital with Archie in her arms and heading back to Frogmore Cottage the very same day. On the surface, it sounds triumphant, the modern Duchess breezing through labor without missing a beat. But doctors and mothers alike were quick to point out the red flags. Standard recovery protocols, especially for a first child, rarely involve sending a mother home just hours after delivery. Observation for complications, pain management, and newborn monitoring are all part of the expected care. Rushing that process isn't just unusual, it's risky. Then there's the logistics. The drive from Portland Hospital in central London to Frogmore Cottage in Windsor isn't short. New mothers are generally advised against long car journeys so soon after labor, especially following an epidural. Yet Harry's version suggests Meghan went straight from delivery to an extended trip, with no mention of medical checks or precautions. Sources claim this compressed timeline baffled staff who were familiar with how carefully royal births are usually managed. Every detail is normally documented, choreographed, and transparent. But in Meghan's case, the secrecy and speed created a gap that critics like Owens were all too eager to fill. What should have been a moment of celebration instead became a question mark. Why the rush? Why the secrecy? And why does the official story sound so different from the medical norm? Royal births aren't just private family milestones, they're public events steeped in tradition. For decades, strict protocol has guided every step. The Queen informed before anyone else, a public announcement delivered swiftly, and the press briefed with accurate details. These customs exist to maintain transparency and trust. But Meghan and Harry's account shattered those expectations. Instead of one consistent explanation, 3 different narratives emerged about why protocol wasn't followed.
I have tremendous compassion for any person that is in an emotionally abusive relationship. So emotionally abusive that they have successfully isolated you from your entire family. It's not normal. There is no relationship that you should be in that should isolate you from your entire family.
At first, reporters were told the couple simply wanted privacy. Then came suggestions that it was about Meghan's health. Later still, palace aides hinted at logistical challenges that delayed communication. The contradictions sowed confusion. Reporters who had spent years covering royal births described the rollout as chaotic and evasive. For the public, it looked less like careful boundary setting and more like a cover-up. And here's where the damage multiplied. By stepping away from tradition without a clear, unified message, Meghan and Harry left a void. Into that void poured speculation, mistrust, and whispers that something wasn't right. Critics argued that the couple wanted to control the narrative so tightly that they bent the truth in the process. Supporters countered that they deserved privacy as new parents, but in the court of public opinion, the lack of clarity only added fuel to the fire. For the monarchy, an institution built on ritual and perception, that chaos was more than embarrassing, it was destabilizing. Behind the polished narrative and spare, quieter voices from Portland Hospital tell a different story. Staff who were present during that time recall events that don't quite align with Harry's dramatic retelling. Sources claim there was no evidence of a secret elevator that Harry described as part of their discreet escape. Nurses who worked on the ward say that while security was heightened, nothing about Meghan's stay suggested the elaborate cloak and dagger movements Harry portrayed. It was, by their recollection, a fairly standard high-profile delivery, not a spy thriller. Even details as small as food service have been disputed. Harry claimed that Meghan tucked into comfort food after labor, yet staff insist the hospital's catering rules didn't allow for such indulgence in the way he described. These might seem like trivial details, but when pieced together, they chip away at the couple's credibility. And it's not just about what was remembered. Insiders whisper that hospital employees found themselves baffled by how much Harry's published version deviated from their reality. Some quietly suggested that embellishment, rather than accuracy, was driving the story. For critics like Candace Owens, these hospital whispers were gold. Each inconsistency gave her more ammunition to argue that the Sussexes weren't just rewriting their lives, they were rewriting the facts. Of all the details Harry included in Spare, none sparked more debate than his mention of Meghan receiving 2 epidurals during labor. At first glance, it sounds like a minor medical note, but experts were quick to call it unusual, even improbable. An epidural isn't a painkiller that can simply be doubled up on request. It's a carefully administered procedure monitored closely for risks like blood pressure drops or prolonged recovery. Most mothers receive a single dose that can be adjusted if necessary, but Harry's description of 2 epidurals raised eyebrows. Was it a misunderstanding on his part or a deliberate exaggeration to make the story more dramatic? What made the claim more questionable was Meghan's supposed recovery. According to Harry, she was back on her feet and discharged within hours. But anyone familiar with epidurals knows that full mobility and stability take time. Leaving the hospital so quickly after 2 procedures would be highly irregular. Medical professionals who reviewed Harry's account pointed out that either the details were blurred or the truth had been reshaped for effect. And once that seed of doubt was planted, it spread quickly. If something as straightforward as pain relief could be misrepresented, what else in their story had been polished for public consumption? Candace Owens seized on this contradiction, framing it as proof that the Sussexes' version of events was less about honesty and more about image. And for many listeners, the medical implausibility was enough to turn skepticism into outright mistrust. One of Meghan Markle's most visible roles since stepping into public life has been as an advocate for women's health and maternal care. She's spoken passionately about the importance of proper medical treatment, fair access for mothers, and the struggles women face after childbirth. Those causes have earned her global praise. But this is where the cracks in her own story become especially damaging. If Meghan is a champion for maternal health, Why does her personal account sound so inconsistent with standard medical practice? Her version, with multiple epidurals, a same-day discharge, and a long car journey back to Windsor, contradicts the very guidelines she has urged the world to take seriously. Critics see this as more than sloppy storytelling. They view it as a calculated attempt to present a superwoman narrative, the Duchess who endured labor with ease, returned home effortlessly, and re-emerged days later, polished and flawless. A powerful image, but one that undermines the realities most mothers face. For supporters, Meghan's story may simply reflect her desire for privacy or her effort to reclaim control over how much of her experience she shares. But for skeptics, amplified by voices like Candace Owens, the contrast between Meghan the maternal advocate and Meghan the storyteller is impossible to ignore. It's a gap that threatens not only her credibility, but also the authenticity of the very causes she claims to champion. From the outside, Meghan and Harry's approach to Archie's birth looked less like joyful privacy and more like deliberate secrecy, and that secrecy is what continues to fuel the speculation. Traditionally, royal births are treated with a degree of openness. The Queen is notified first, the palace issues official statements, and the press receives clear timelines. These steps aren't just ceremonial, they reassure the public that the line of succession is transparent and beyond question. But Meghan and Harry disrupted all of that. Announcements were delayed, statements contradicted one another, and the narrative shifted depending on who was speaking. Even sympathetic reporters admitted they couldn't make sense of the timeline. So, why the secrecy? Insiders say there may have been multiple motives. Some point to Meghan's desire to control every aspect of her public image. Others claim Harry, scarred by his own childhood in the spotlight, wanted to shield Archie at all costs. A third possibility whispers that the couple were more concerned about keeping leverage with the press, feeding out just enough to maintain interest while holding back the rest. Whatever the motive, the effect was the same. Public trust eroded. Once people felt details were being hidden, every inconsistency became magnified. And by the time Harry's memoir added even more confusion, the doubts had already hardened into suspicion. For Meghan and Harry, the secrecy that was meant to protect their family may have done the opposite, leaving the door wide open for critics like Candace Owens to tear their story apart. By the time Spare reignited questions about Meghan's pregnancy, skepticism was already simmering, but Candace Owens turned that quiet unease into a full-blown conversation. In her trademark style, Owens didn't soften the blow. She laid out the contradictions step by step, the epidural claim, the recovery timeline, the secrecy around announcements, and asked why the public was expected to accept them without question. Her critique was cutting, but what made it powerful was its simplicity. She wasn't speculating wildly, she was pointing to what Harry himself had written. That approach resonated. Clips of her commentary went viral, picked up not just by her followers but by gossip outlets and royal watchers alike. Suddenly, questions that had lingered on the sidelines were center stage again. For Meghan, this was particularly damaging because Owens framed the inconsistencies as part of a broader pattern. If they'll embellish something as personal as childbirth, Owens implied, what else have they been less than honest about? It was the kind of framing that sticks, planting doubt that stretches beyond one story. And once that doubt seeped into public discourse, it was impossible to contain. Meghan and Harry's critics had fresh ammunition, while their defenders struggled to explain away details that simply didn't add up. Owens didn't create the controversy, but by amplifying it, she ensured it wouldn't quietly fade. The fallout from Candace Owens' critique and the contradictions in Harry's memoir stretches far beyond one birth story. For Harry and Meghan, credibility is their currency, the foundation of their brand, their deals, and their public influence. And once that credibility is shaken, everything else starts to wobble. Critics argue that if the couple can't present a consistent account of something as intimate as childbirth, then questions naturally spill over into other areas. Did they exaggerate their struggles with the palace? Did they distort key details in interviews? Have their narratives always been less about truth and more about control? The implications reach into the monarchy itself. Archie and Lilibet's positions in the line of succession have already been a point of debate. Sources claim that lingering suspicion over Meghan's pregnancy stories makes some within Buckingham quietly uneasy, worried that even the appearance of inconsistency undermines the institution's image of stability. Then there's Hollywood. Meghan's advocacy for women's health and Harry's drive for mental health awareness rely heavily on trust. If audiences believe parts of their personal story don't add up, their platforms lose moral authority. And in an industry built on reputation, trust lost is rarely regained. For the Sussexes, this storm is about more than defending a timeline. It's about salvaging the integrity of their entire narrative, and with Candace Owens amplifying the cracks, that fight is only getting harder. Meghan Markle's pregnancy story was supposed to be a chapter of joy, a moment of strength, family, and new beginnings. Instead, it has become a lightning rod for doubt, dissected detail by detail until even the smallest contradictions cast long shadows. And there's so much to unpack here, still. From the epidural debate to the rushed recovery, from the secrecy that broke royal tradition to the way Candace Owens has reignited the fire, the questions refuse to die down. Each inconsistency chips away at the carefully crafted image Harry and Meghan have built, and each whisper fuels a narrative that the public no longer fully trusts. For their supporters, Meghan and Harry remain victims of endless scrutiny, punished for daring to rewrite royal rules. For their critics, this is proof that their story is less about authenticity and more about performance. Either way, credibility, the one thing they cannot afford to lose, is now the most fragile part of their brand. So what happens next? If Meghan's pregnancy story can unravel under the weight of its own contradictions, what other parts of the Sussex saga might be next in line for scrutiny? This is Hollywood Daily Report. Subscribe now, because the next revelation could be the one that changes everything we thought we knew about Harry and Meghan.